What is the job of software developer really all about? What is it that we are really trying to achieve when we set out on creating some new software? There may be lots of different motivations, some technical, some commercial, some for our own amusement. Some of them are good and will help us to do a better job, whatever the nature of our task, and some are bad and will make it next to impossible to achieve a successful end, whatever it is that is our goal. I think that there is an important difference of focus that separates the people and organisations that build great software from the people and organisations that build the kind of software that other people only ever use when they're forced to do so. And I think at its core, this touches on what it is that we think we are doing when we start writing software. Hi, I'm Dave Farley of Continuous Delivery. Welcome to my channel. We've been producing content here now for nearly 3 years and we've released over 250 videos. I hope that you've enjoyed some of them and even better, found some of them helpful. The channel has significantly exceeded our original expectations in its growth, but it would mean a lot to me if you could help us to reach even more people by sparing a second or two to register your support. So if you haven't already, please do hit subscribe, and if you are already a subscriber, thank you very much. But may I ask you to check that you've also clicked the bell notification icon so that YouTube will keep you informed when we release new content. And finally, if you enjoyed the video today, do hit like as well. In a recent video, I spoke about the problem of trying to specify new features by using UI sketches as a way of specifying requirements. This sparked some interesting conversations in the comments which prompted me to join in, and I found myself saying something again that I often say here. Our job as software developers is to solve problems for people with software, not to write code. But I realised that my words could be easily misunderstood. So I thought that I'd try and make my point a bit more clearly, which is what I am aiming for with this episode. The question that I'd like to explore today is what really is software development all about? And I mean by this both in terms of what is it that we are trying to achieve as well as what is it that we really do. My shorthand version is nearly right, but I'm not entirely happy with the choice of words. Solving problems sounds like a maths test or a puzzle of some kind, and I think that software development is considerably trickier than that. The word problems also sounds rather like something unpleasant, and so that's not quite right either, because we can create joy with software too. I think that the idea of us as problem solvers is an accurate one, but the use of the word problem is a bit confusing really. Imagine that we are tasked with writing a game, and as part of that game, the on-screen player needs to jump over something, a barrel rolling downhill perhaps like in Donkey Kong. There are lots of problems to solve here. How do we represent failure if the barrel hits the player? How do we initiate the jump? How far up and how far forward should the player jump? What if they touch the barrel when they're flying through the virtual air? Come to that, how strong does gravity need to be? And so how long should they be in the air when they jump? And what happens when they land? How many points or lives do they lose if they touch the barrel? And how will we detect that the player is back on the ground after they've jumped so that they can land and carry on playing? That's a pretty long list, but if I really tried, I'm pretty sure that I could fill the rest of this episode with more and more things that would be important for us to decide if we really wanted to write this game. And all of those things would influence the outcome that we were trying to achieve, the more technical choices as well as the more game dynamics choices. How do I draw my player on the screen so that I can move and not leave a trail behind? How does the player win? How do I manage the timing so that the game plays on a fast computer as well as on a slow one? And so on and so on and so on. I am now imagining you watching this and thinking Farley's lost it again, and you may be right. But I think that this is about a lot more than only writing games. This is the problem of software development in general. There's always a lot going on, and it's a whole complicated mix of things, some technical, some not. I think that you would agree with me that if we organised software development so that I demanded that you gave me a precise answer to every single one of these problems before I started work, it would be a ridiculous way to create a game. Yet all of these problems and many more must be solved if we are to end up with something that really works as a game. Let me pause there and say thanks to our sponsors. We're extremely fortunate to be sponsored by Equal Experts, Tricentis and Transfic. All these companies offer products and services that are well aligned with the topics that we discuss here every week. So if you're looking for excellence in continuous delivery and software engineering, click on the links in the description below, both to support them and to find out some interesting things. Of course, I'm only using this example of a game as something that I think is generically true of every other kind of software that we write, as well as games. We always depend on the expertise and experience of software developers to fill in the gaps. Many of the things in my example are either well known to game writers already, or if not, they'll try stuff out to see what works and how they can achieve an appropriate model for the playability of the game. This is how game writing and software development always works. Yet often, sometimes even for games, we fall into the trap of attempting to do programming by remote control in our organisations and trying to specify every problem in detail along the way. I think this is a huge mistake. For one reason, the more that we try to do this, the worse things become, because it's not only impossible to think of every problem that we will need to solve along the route, particularly if we're far away from the code, but in addition to that, by attempting to do so, we tend to infantilize development teams so that they won't take on the responsibility to solve even the tiny problems that arise for themselves. In organisations like this, we are in fact actively building barriers to an effective software development process. As an employer of software developers, it's wrong to tell them in detail what to do and the problems to solve. The reality of good software development is that it's an important part of the developer's job to discover what needs to be done, not just to do as they are told. This is also often a fault of developers too, particularly more junior developers, but also developers who've been trained poorly by poor management or with bad processes to assume that it's their job to do what they're told by domain experts or product owners. It's always true that the really hard and interesting part of our job is never just merely the translation of a precise sequence of ever more detailed statements in languages like English or some other form of representation like the picture of a user interface, translating that into a programming language of some kind that can be executed by a computer. The difficult and most interesting part of our job really is thinking of all of the problems that we will need to solve to achieve our goals and then finding solutions to those problems in a way that will help us to think of yet more problems to solve and will leave us free enough to be able to solve those problems easily when we discover them later. This is what makes software difficult, not the syntax of our programming languages or the intricacies of our frameworks and tools. This is the core of our job, the problem that it is our responsibility to solve, to discover what the problem the users of our software really need to solve and then come up with clever, effective solutions to those problems. This is an intensely creative thing because there is no right solution to any of this. This is always a subjective thing. Our job is to design new ways of delivering value to our users. And if that sounds a bit trickier than validate this postcode like this, good, because it is. It's a lot trickier than that. The illusion that software development is some kind of service function that merely translates business need into working software is a pernicious one that stops us from being able to do a good job, in my opinion. Let's go back to my game for a moment. Imagine the requirements necessary to solve all of the problems that I outlined. How high should the player jump? How far? How fast should they fall? What counts as the ground? And so on and so on. What would that look like if we wrote it all down? I think that whatever language you chose to define all of that, it would end up looking quite a lot like a programming language and code, because that is exactly what it would be. Our programming language look the way that they do because that is what it takes to express ideas clearly enough in sufficiently pedantic detail for a computer to execute them, and then later for us to be able to understand what it is that they're doing so that we can come back and change them when we detect a mistake or come up with a better way of doing things. This seems to me so obvious, so plain, but as organisations, we often try to avoid this kind of creativity. We often try and move that out of the realm of the software development process. This seems to me so obvious, so plain, yet as organisations that employ software developers, is this really how we organise the work for them? Or do we rather try to write code for them with architects and technical leads doing design work and product owners and domain experts coming up with precisely accurate statements of requirements that must be exactly fulfilled? How do we define work for developers? How do they expect it to be defined? Do we present them with targets in the form of impacts that we hope to achieve, or as a sequence of precisely defined tasks that someone somewhere thinks will be enough to achieve the goal of the development as a whole? In the best places, it's the former, impacts to achieve rather than tasks to check off from a list. In great teams, they are given what is essentially the outline of a problem for them to solve, and then they are asked and left to figure out what the problem really is, and to learn and explore all of the little sub-problems that they must solve along the route to discovering an effective solution to the problem that is really their target. But only once they've learnt enough to truly understand the problem. And yes, this is a difficult thing to estimate, but that's one of the reasons why software is difficult to estimate. It's not because we type at different rates, it's because we must first learn what ideas to express and then decide what to type. For difficult problems, you need a collection of people with a range of different skills to do all of this. And they will need to work very closely together to understand and explore the problem in sufficient depth, to discover enough of the little problems along the way to be able to find suitable solutions to them. Some of these people will necessarily be very technical because they will think of a lot of different kinds of problems that non-technical people will miss altogether. But even for deeply technical systems, we will also need some people who have different kinds of knowledge involved. But let's be clear here, though, because this is one of the enormous mistakes that as an industry I think we often make. No one knows the answer. Our job is discovering the answer. So it's a huge mistake to blame the requirements on the business or the product owner for not telling us the answers, because they don't know the answers either. They're guessing, and in some areas their guesses will be better than ours, but in many their guesses will be a lot worse than ours too. It's our job collectively to work together to learn the answers. Actually, it's even worse than that. It's our job collectively to work together to even ask the right questions, let alone learn the answers. Software development is not a translation service from business requirement to code. I think that one of the problems that Agile thinking inadvertently introduced was to raise the idea of the customer a little too high. This is a shame because it's both right and wrong at the same time. Yes, we should be customer focused, in that our real job is to discover the solutions that matter to our customers, even when they don't know what they are. That's what the software developers are really for. But that doesn't mean that the customer or product owner or domain experts knows the problem that we are really solving either. They don't, and however good they are at their job, they're inevitably missing some very important pieces of the picture that are essential to achieving a successful outcome. So they need to talk to us about those things too. I think it's helpful and much closer to the truth to think of software development as this collaborative exploratory process rather than as some kind of mechanical sequence of steps. And it helps us to avoid some of the grosser, more common mistakes in software, like treating the customer as the ultimate authority on everything and developers merely cogs in the wheel of some form of translation process from a precisely defined sacrosanct set of requirements into working code. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks too for watching to our patrons, and thanks for your support. And if you are not already a patron, do consider supporting the channel. There are links in the description below. Thank you and bye-bye.